Well, good morning or almost afternoon here on January 19th, 2022. This is Terry Oswald, and welcome back to How to Study and Learn About the Battle of Little Bighorn. You know, when I delivered this presentation at the Omaha Westerners meeting on December 2nd at the Anthony's restaurant, it took about an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 20. With my intro and the last video, we're right at 60 minutes. I think because of the ability to be a little more relaxed, maybe for me to cover some other things, maybe add a little more context to my context. I'll bet we'll go about an hour and 45, maybe an extra 30 minutes, but I'm hopeful that you'll find it worthwhile. So here we are, we're about to talk about the battle. I'm going to jump right into this. You know, about 2 weeks ago, somebody I know through the Little Bighorn Associates Facebook group, he wrote me a note on something unrelated to this. And he was intrigued by some of my future readings I have coming up as I publish. Always the way I operate is I'll say I picked this book and this is what I'll be covering. And then a week or two later, I come back with a summary. You might call it a poor man's abstract. But this person wrote me a note privately and he says, "Wow, Terry, you're about to go where very few tread." Well, I like that statement. And in fact, I'm going to appropriate it here. Talking about this battle is somewhere a lot of the folks that have tread here, I think, need to be very careful because it is easy to get some things wrong and to misrepresent. And I'm going to do my best. And but I'm probably going to keep this reasonably vanilla, except when I'm done, I will cover some good resources and I'll probably make some comments on perspectives. With that, let's just jump right in. As we left last time, we were taking a peek at the orders from General Terry. Of course, these orders, and let me extend my screen. Okay, yep, these orders, they arise out of the intelligence from Major Reno Scout. They arise from the information gained in the rendezvous with Colonel Gibbon and his command. They arise just from the mind trust of leadership in General Terry's command, crossed with Custer's, 7th Cav, on through, again, Gibbons and so on. So it comes together. Terry, the flag officer, issues the following instructions to General Custer or Lieutenant Colonel Custer. "You should proceed up the rosebed until you ascertain definitely the direction in which the trail above spoken of leads. Should it be found, as it appears almost certain that it will be found, to turn towards the Little Bighorn, General Terry thinks that you should still proceed southwards, perhaps as far as the headwaters of the Tongue, and then turn towards the Little Horn, feeling constantly, however, to your left, so as to preclude the escape of the Indians passing around your left flank. The column of Colonel Gibbon is now in motion for the mouth of the Bighorn, coming down. As soon as it reaches that point, it will cross the Yellowstone and move up at least as far as the forks of the Big and Little Horn. Of course, its future movements must be controlled by circumstances as they arise, but it is hoped that the Indians, if upon the Little Horn, may be so nearly enclosed by the two columns that their escape will be impossible. The department commander desires that on your way up the Rosebud, you should thoroughly examine the upper part of Tulloch's Creek, and that you should endeavor to send a scout through the Colonel Gibbon's command, while the general will send a party to scout to the lower part of Tulloch's Creek." These are the orders. Very important. General Custer is to go south. General Custer is to scout Tulloch's Creek, which you'll see on a map. He is to use a scout named Herendeen, which comes from Gibbon's command, specifically assigned to him by the flag officer, General Terry, so he can send a report through. At the same time, he's telling General Custer that Gibbon will be coming down and the general himself will come down Tulloch's from the other way. As this plan goes into place on the 21st, Custer, Lieutenant Colonel Custer, eliminates the wings of his 7th Cavalry. Willard, James Willard, has research in his day-by-day Little Bighorn diary that suggests that General Custer did this because he didn't ever want to risk having the 7th divided again, as it was when Major Reno was awarded 6 companies, and he, the lieutenant colonel, got 6. So we're going to go flat. We're going to go with just 12 companies, no wings. And this ensures Lieutenant Colonel Custer's control over the entire 7th. There is debate about these orders. There are some members of Terry's command and Gibbon's that request that General Terry keep the entire combined force of Gibbon and Terry together, and that General Terry command all of it, that they all go together because of their fears about the size of what they might encounter. But General Terry doesn't go with that advice, and he makes statements that he desires to give the lieutenant colonel the command of the 7th so he can redeem himself after being in the doghouse with President Grant, after Custer testified against members of President Grant's cabinet and repeating secondhand information about Indian agency corruption, and it, of course, created this big firestorm in Washington, D.C. that resulted in the commander-in-chief, President Grant, standing down Lieutenant Colonel Custer for some time. On the night of the 21st, it is documented that the 7th, that there was quite a party. There's a lot of drinking and so on. There was some article, a blind anonymous article written. James Willard, in his Little Bighorn diary, says that General Custer sat in his tent writing this, and that this article, which was published after the attack, attacks Major Reno for his scout. Others will say, well, we don't really know if General Custer did it. It could have been someone in that group. Regardless, on the night of the 21st, while the regiment is tying one on, I'll just call it that, they're tying one on, and they're drinking. The general's in his tent. Others are in their tent, possibly. And this article, this anonymous article, which seems to be, based on my studies, a pretty common practice at the times. It's officers attacking each other blindly through the press. But anyway, that goes on. So we depart. It's the 22nd. The 7th Cavalry, it's documented, is not well formed. There's trouble with the 150, actually 160, 170 mule train that is guarded by 80 men, and also it is not guarded, is managed by 80 men, which consists of about 7 troopers pulled from the 12 companies plus others. So they're going to move down, and they're going to leave on the 22nd at about noon. Again, 660 with the 7th Cavalry and about 50 scouts. As they move along, they'll make their way, and we'll find that some folks note that General Custer is behaving differently. He's more inviting. General Custer, or Lieutenant Colonel Custer, historically was kind of a standoffish, from what I've read, a fairly classic example of a military officer of those times. He doesn't he fraternizes some with the men, but not a lot, but he's always kind of he's an officer. He's going to have that face on, and he's going to show. But now on this, he's almost seeking to be friendly. There's comments made by some that the general is going to get killed. I mean, he's just acting so differently on this campaign. But I raise that because it makes you wonder maybe what was going on in his head. What was going on in his head? I don't know. But some authors have suggested that there were things going on of various nature. As he moves down, let's see where Tulloch's Creek is. Here we are. And he rolls along. We'll follow this line: 22nd encampment, 23rd encampment, 24th encampment, 8:45 to 11 p.m. You will see at this point there is no line that goes up to Tulloch's Creek. So Lieutenant Colonel Custer, with conversations, it did involve the scout Herendeen, and he's saying, no, we don't need to go up there. There's nothing up there. We can see the trail, and we can, we don't need to have send you, Mr. Herendeen, with a report to meet the general. I will say the record clearly shows that causes some problems up here, because General Terry, when his force reaches the Tulloch, they indeed do try to scout this, just like he promised. He actually sends Lieutenant Bradley with a force down the Tulloch to try to find the scout that he expected General Custer to have sent. So there's actually an effort up here to find this scout that General Custer did not send. My book, General Custer's Disobeying Orders. There are in these orders I read, and I will admit I chose not to put them here, but I'm going to speak to them. There is another section of this where General Terry makes some statements such as, well, we will not, while you're in the field, and although you have these orders, your judgment will, he doesn't say reign supreme, but that's how many people interpret it. Authors such as Robert Utley, who have written extensively on this, and others have said, well, General Terry was putting that language into these orders kind of to make Lieutenant Colonel Custer feel better, and that the hardcore folks that study this, that are out of the military, there's a great debate, by the way. Some will say Custer had the right to do this, to not send it. Others will say, no, you need to understand the intent of the orders. And the flag officer's intent is very clear right here. And he also, Terry, knew that infantry with Gibbon would not move as fast as supposedly as cavalry. I say supposedly because I'll share some things in the views about some nuances with Army horses as compared to Sioux and Cheyenne and Arapaho horses out in the field, and how actually Army horses may have gone slower, depending on the time of year. But bottom line is that Terry had a plan that he wanted. He understood the speeds of these two forces, and he understood they already kind of knew where they were likely to find the Indians at the Little Bighorn because of Reno Scout. And he wanted them to be in a certain place. Having said that, I'll pull out right now. For those of you that are very interested in this topic, of course, there's a lot of, on the Little Bighorn Associates Pro Boards, you can find tremendous amount. It's all website. You can find a tremendous amount of discussion about this, but also, where's it at? Oh, I've got it. I've actually got it sitting over there, but actually in Colonel Graham's Custer myth, and also, yeah, is that it? Yeah, and not, dang it, sorry. What did I do with Custer myth? I know I have it here. Oh, here it is. Yeah, in Colonel Graham's Custer myth, here it is. And also, darn, and also in Cyrus Townsend Brady's Indian Fights and Fighters. This was actually published in 1904. This came out, I think, about later. I think this may have been as late as the 1950s, but both of these books contain original correspondence of the officers as they debated whether or not various officers, I'm talking flag officers, senior leaders in the Army at the time, they debated back and forth and wrote each other and said, well, did Custer disobey orders and did he not? I will say, I think he disobeyed orders. And I think the record's clear. I can read English. You can piece all the bigger parts together. As I've said, not one book and done, many books and done, many perspectives. As you look at all the perspectives, you look at all the writings, you look at what General Terry wrote after the battle, which some people have questioned the veracity of, that maybe he was covering for himself, but I don't believe he was. It just shapes up very simple what the plan was. Having said that, General General Custer does not scout Tulloch's Fork. Agree or disagree, whether he should or not. Let's see. He also, as you'll see, General Custer disregards General Terry's orders not to go directly to the Little Bighorn. He doesn't go continuing on down south as those orders read. He actually makes a nice right-hand turn and he lines himself up for the attack. And of course, there's a famous moment at the Crow's Nest where the Lieutenant Colonel Custer, and forgive me if I go back and forth between Lieutenant Colonel and Brevet General, but with George Armstrong Custer, I'll try to stick to Lieutenant Colonel because that was his official rank on this campaign. But they have the crow's nest, the moment where they're looking through telescopes, and so binoculars are trying to see, and Lieutenant Colonel Custer doesn't believe there's any there, and so on. But there's scouts with him that are saying yes, yes, yes. There are. It's just filled with Sioux and Cheyenne out here, and so on. Make sure I go through this. So now we're going to jump into it. Based on this, they move further. I'll make sure I got this before. I'm gonna stay back here a little bit. As they do move closer, Lieutenant Colonel Custer will develop a plan which is based on envelopement. Envelopement is classic. It goes back to the Civil War, goes back before then. It's just a classic approach of where you divide a regiment into different wings or bigger battalions. And as we'll get to in a moment, we'll have Reno go into the valley. We'll have Benteen go off to the southwest, and we'll also have Lieutenant Colonel Custer with 5 companies go to the north. But the idea is the envelope. Aha, here we even see we have envelopement from General Terry as well. Some other things I'd like to cover now, just before we get into the thrust of this, is that the 7th Cavalry consists right now of about 640 troopers across 12 companies. And to kind of give you, I'm using Fred Widener's latest book, by the way, Great Sioux Campaign, 1876, day by day. I'm reading page 176, 177. Fred has some great tables. Other authors do too, but this is incredibly handy to me. Is that Major Reno will have companies A, G, and M. And the totals of troopers, to me, it's not important to know if it was 39 or 46. Just each one of them is about 40. Company A has 2 officers and 39 men. Company G has 2 officers and 35 men. Company M, 1 officer and 46. I can read through every one of the companies. D, 2 officers and 43. I can jump down to I, 2 officers and 37. Company E, 2 officers and 38. When they get into the battle here in about 3 minutes when I'm there, we'll talk of, they'll dismount in certain locations, and 1 man out of 4 will hold the horses. So we go from 40 to 30 in our effective fighting force. The other thing is, out of that 640, 120 men are assigned to the 160 pack mules. You have, again, Captain McDougal with B company, Captain B company, and then of course Lieutenant Matthey, who has a force of about 80 to take care of the mules and the pack train. So a lot of the men out of the total force are going to be taking care of that pack mule train, which has all the ammunition, all the food, all the supplies, everything that they need. So this thing, the 7th Cavalry, is getting smaller. Of that 7th Cavalry, keep in mind that debates, maybe 60% of them, or 65, had battle experience going all the way back, counting Indian Wars, other battles at the Yellowstone or Washita or wherever, on through Civil War experiences. But this group has not been practicing. And I'll get into that later in my third part of this, about the Army perspective, that budgets were cut, and they really had difficulty practicing firing, shooting. On the other hand, if Mr. Custer, General Custer, or Lieutenant Colonel Custer, he's going to encounter, again, an encampment close to 2,500 warriors. It's going to have upwards of 12,000 inhabitants, and it's going to be spread out 1.5 miles long. And I would encourage all any of you that are really kind of interested in this, to go out and you stand at one spot here and then have a friend go 1.5 miles away. And I mean, just try to imagine how big this camp was. It was very large. It's like charging into a small city. Bigger, about the size of Lamar's, Iowa, where I lived in Northwest Iowa when I went on my first little Bighorn battlefield tour in '91. That covers some interesting statistics. The camp here, and you can read this, they had already, as you know, defeated, repulsed General Crook and his sizable force on the 17th. And Wooden Leg, in his testimony, which I have sitting here somewhere, I won't find it, but Wooden Leg in his book authored by Marquis says, they never imagined that anyone would dare attack their camp after having defeated the soldiers of the Rosebuds because of its sheer size and because they were on land promised to them in perpetuity. Yeah, this is non-ceded territory. Non-ceded means it was granted, and the Sioux and Cheyenne and Arapaho had not ceded it back to government. They haven't agreed to go back and live on reservations and say, yeah, we know it's part of the Treaty of 1868. We're going to kind of have it on a virtual basis while everybody else goes out there. No. They're saying, no, we're not ceding this ground. This is the Powder River country. They consider it rich in game and having a spiritual significance and so on. So it's non-ceded. Give you some ideas too when we get into the battle. The Cheyenne Circle alone has about 300 lodges, and the Cheyenne Circle will be at the top. It'll be at the northern point of the battlefield, of the camp that's attacked. It'll have 1,600 Cheyenne in it as well, just that one area. 12,000 total Sioux, Cheyenne, 6 Arapaho. Here's an interesting thought I have wondered about, I've wanted to check on. So maybe someone could check on it and post to this when I post this video. I have asked myself just how many Sioux were in America at this time. And then let's say it was 25,000. And let's say there are 7,000 or 8,000 Sioux here. That means 1/3 of all the Sioux that were alive they were here. They were in his encampment. This is a big deal. It indeed is true what Chief Red Cloud told Gibbon, that they will send all their young men from every lodge, and they don't care. Send your dogs. We will kill your dogs. I mean, they're there. These are big numbers. Cool. Let's see. Yeah, with that, let's take a look. Jump to map D. Some other things before I go through this, though. These are important things to set the context. I want to go over some distances. At one point here, and in some point, we'll actually have, we'll have Benteen right about here at about 12:30 p.m. Now, he is going to be at one point about 8, maybe 9 miles away from Custer Hill, maybe even 10. So the distances here are, I feel, and some writers feel, enormous when we're at these points. From Custer Hill to the Reno areas, when we get into that, is about 4 3/8 miles. That's a straight line distance. That's not considering the terrain, which is very filled with gullies and coulees and some really good hiding spots, place to be very porous if you're a fight like the warriors do. Very mobile, hand-to-hand, fluid sort of movements that they employed. Custer Hill to Calhoun Hill, which will become important in a few minutes, it's about 3/4 mile. That's about 8 city blocks away, considerable distances. Now I'll give you an idea. The range of a 45-70 Springfield carbine at best is 1,000 yards. So a mile, let's see, we got 5,280 feet and a mile. You divide that by 3, I think that's 1,700 yards, 1,800 yards. So These areas are outside mutual supporting distances. So keep that in mind. So if one company's here and another one's company's here, they're not going to be able to like support each other because they're out of range of each other's weapons. Custer Hill is about 3 miles away from Ware Point. That'll be important later in a few minutes. Also, what's important is Calhoun Hill. Remember this, the 4D. Lieutenant Colonel Custer is going to be intent at about 3:45 or 4 p.m. of reaching what we call 4D. And I have an aerial of that courtesy of Greg Michno, and we have great maps from Richard Newman where we'll take a look at that area. But it's about 2.33 miles from Calhoun Hill. So Lieutenant Colonel Custer, some members of F, I think F and or maybe C and E, they're all out there, a small group of them, and they're well beyond anybody else. So let's start. At 12:10 p.m., and I'm relying heavily, I'm just going to go with a strategy defeat by Fred Wagner. Some folks will quarrel. They'll say, well, Fred's got this off by 10 minutes or 20 minutes or something. But I would say, it is worth the price of it. Don't get a commission on this, but you can read in great depth that this book is based on other books, which I'll cover here in a little bit. I think it's a good representation of what went on. And we'll get into that in a minute, why, of some period of time on. So I also, again, you'll be relying on these maps by Richard Newman. We have some photos by Patricia Glennon, also with Fred Wagner. And of course, as I've mentioned, aerial photos by Greg Michno. So Captain Benteen with 3 companies, about 40 men each, they break off to scout to the left at about 12:10 p.m. So they're all together. Google, Company B, and the trains is here. Custer with C, E, F, I, and L is here. Reno with A, G, and M are here, and some scouts, and of course scouts. They're 11:45. At 12:10, Benteen's going to get his orders to go off this way, and he is to go over hill, over hill, over hill. And while he's traveling, Lieutenant Colonel Custer will be sending messengers to him to exhort him to continue to move and to tell him that if he finds any Indians, he's to outflank them. But Benteen also does have orders that at some point he is to turn back to the main trail. And of course, you can see he'll travel along 12:25, 1:25, 1:35. He'll begin to come back along probably about 12, looks like about 12:40. He'll make a turn and he'll 12:50, and he'll start coming back up to the main trail. Again, Benteen receives an order via Voss from Custer to continue the second line of bluffs at 12:18. Benteen receives another order to continue on over the ridges to the southwest from Custer at 12:26. Benteen spots the Gray Horse Company moving rapidly to the north at 12:40 as he looks far to the north. So at about 12:40, Benteen is probably here. He can see the Gray Horse Company with Custer at 12:40. I would say Custer's right about here. So he can see up here, and he can see the Gray Horse Company of Company E with Custer. Benteen finally turns his command to the main trail at 1:25 after finding nothing, and he becomes concerned that his force could become isolated and annihilated. You know, there's no doubt that the memory of Elliott and what happened at the Washita is in their heads. It's also, you know, they have, of course, the Fetterman massacre of 1866 in their minds. There are others where 80 men get cut off and, you know, wiped out from each side. So these officers are certainly familiar with that. I also wanted to point out, though, when they made this plan, I want to make sure I go back here, and they're talking and they're making the plan as General Custer's doing that. There was debate on whether these groups, whether the regiment should be broken into battalions. And Captain Benteen pushed back and he says, General, shouldn't we keep the entire regiment together? And General Custer said, no, you have your orders. Now, in defense of Custer, again, this is classic envelopement. It's a common practice. I totally get it. But there certainly was concern about what they might encounter, how big it was. Major Reno's force separates from Custer at 1:05 p.m. So we're out here. You can see they march along together at 1:05. Custer proceeds to the river 1.5 miles away to the north. So our Custer is going to go to the river. He's going to go straight north up here. But Major Reno is commanded to move at as rapid a gait as you feel prudent and to charge afterwards, and you will be supported by the whole outfit. The Indians are about 2.5 miles ahead. On the jump, follow them as fast as you can and charge them wherever you find them, and we will support you. Scout Gerard from Reno's command meets Lieutenant Cook with Custer's command and reports that the Indians are coming up the valley to meet Reno at 1:16. So Major Reno and his 3 companies and scouts move down here. They're saying, aha, in my mind, think of what I talked about in part 1, how Colonel Gibbon and them are being greeted on the other side of the Yellowstone. Well, this is not what we're supposed to happen. We're being greeted down here. So Major Reno sends Gerard. Custer learns of the report from Gerard and makes the fateful decision to take his command to the north at 1:19 rather than halt and support Reno directly there. That may be my words. I probably have made that decision. I find it very interesting that Lieutenant Colonel Custer learned that the conditions were not going to be quite like he'd ordered in his plan, where Major Reno would be able to just charge into these folks and, hit the camp here. You see all the circles and charge it forward and subdue it. He's already knows right here that something is going awry, and he's choosing to go north. Reno's force moves down the valley. Indians meet Reno's. They dismount at 1:35 and they form their skirmish lines 400 yards from the north of the village. The camp, Hunkpapa, Blackfeet, and so on, it's caught by surprise. Hunkpapa with Chief Gall, they die, including members of Gall's family. Sioux begin to rise up, stir up dust, demonstrate, and they're perceived as a threat by Reno's command. Major Reno ultimately sends 2 more messengers to Lieutenant Colonel Custer's command, informing Custer of the conditions he faces. He never receives a response. Those messengers, one is Reno's striker, the other is a cook. Both die with Custer. Their bodies are found at on the 27th when General Terry and Gibbon arrive and they begin to look over the battlefield. They're found there dead. Here's a shot. It's an aerial, again, courtesy of Greg Michno. We're looking up in the air, down. This is the area down here, the turnabout. I'm sure that Reno Hill is back here, but you can kind of look and see this terrain. This terrain lent itself for people, for the warriors with their close-in fighting, with their bows and arrows, with their repeating rifles, with all the different kinds of weapons they had, but they really come down and I would say swarm from multiple sides and not be seen. It had the feel for Custer as the battle went on that they're just being swarmed. These warriors and others are coming out of nowhere. Here we see another view. This is, and I regret it's a little blurry, but I know that Patricia Glennon and Fred Wagner are working on something really cool. And so when it comes out, be sure to purchase it, order it, get it, or download a better copy of this. But here you can see down here, Reno's dismountment area, the general area of Reno's Uplink Advance, the general limits of the A and G skirmish line, general limits of companies, M, I think, Advance, the beginning of the Gary Owen Loop, and so on. My point is, I also want to point horse herds. There are upwards of 20,000 ponies. That number is far greater than what they imagined. And a big part of this plan is Lieutenant Colonel Custer's intent to use his Crow and Arikara scouts to scatter the ponies. Well, the camp is constructed very smartly, and that the ponies are not just in one camp, they're in multiple camps. So Sitting Bull's camp, Crazy Horse, Gall, the Cheyenne, all of them, they're thinking ahead. They've already got this thing laid out. And of course, think about the enormity of it. a small scouting force is not going to get in there and be very effective scattering these ponies. But the herds, plural, is an important word for you to know. Having said that, map E. The hung papa see Custer near the bluffs south of Ware Point at about make sure I've got my maps here. Yeah, map E. Near Ware Point at 142. Let's find our general. Custer at 142. Yep, so they're seeing them there. Custer tells his men to hold their horses. There are plenty of them for all of us at 144, and there certainly are. M Company, as the rest of Major Reno's command, become concerned about being cut off and start to move back to the timber where the horses are at 147. So here we are from 140 to 2. We have M, A, and G, and they're getting incredible pressure. Getting attacked from this side. You can see Crazy Horse is going to come down this way at 2 o'clock. And the charge of Crazy Horse is described by Black Elk, in where Black Elk speaks, John Neihart's famous book, is just incredible, by the way. 200 or more warriors blowing bone whistles. They are coming. They are ready to do business. With their famous war leader and spiritual leader, Crazy Horse. The timber is reached at 149, so he's going to withdraw, and they're going to go back into this timber area. Sergeant Knipe is sent back from Custer's command all the way to Captain McDougal and the pack train at 147 from around Sharpshooter's Ridge. Custer's and others watch the action in the valley from 3411. It's a very high point at 153. So our general, he's let's see, Custer, 11453. He's going to be in this area, Sharpshooter's Ridge, all this here, but he's going to be this area, and there's a spot named 3411. I believe it's a geodesic spot, and it's on the battlefield. And this is where some folks believe was the highest point, the best point on this battlefield. And they believe that General Custer himself was able to see everything from happening. And he saw it from there. At this point, at about Bugler Martini is sent with the faithful "Come quick, bring packs, big village note by Cook to Benteen at 201. At 2 o'clock, Mr. Benteen, you can see 140. At about 2 o'clock, he's right about here. Maybe he gets it around the morass. There's a morass, and of course, Benteen's 3 companies do stop and water their horses for about 15 minutes at that area. There's some debate. Some people say it was 20. Some people suggest that he drug his feet. Reno's M Company is turned at 207. Pressure's building in the timber on the troopers. Of course, Crazy Horse with 200 troop warriors arrive at M Company's position near the timber after turning Reno's flank at 211. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a stunning scene as Crazy Horse's forces chopping, shooting, swinging battle clubs, blowing bone whistles, and members of Reno's force are being killed, knocked off their horses, and more. I mean, again, the Indians did not run in the face of the army. No, not at all. But it would appear that Chief Red Cloud has said, we will send all of our young men to deal with the dogs. It's coming to pass. Captain Benteen reaches the lone troop teepee at 2:35 p.m. As his 3 company forces returning. Reno's forces begin to reach the hill at about 2:38. Of course, Reno now has decided he's getting pressure inside these woods. He's getting fired on from the east. We'll call it the east-northeast. He's getting pressure from the top, overrun by Crazy Horse and others. And actually, they are making their way to get up this hill, the Reno Hill. It is in some ways a last man for yourself. At the front of the charge back up the hill, it is well formed. In the back of it, it's not well formed, but of the 120, 130 men, I think ultimately 100, 105, 110 make it to the top of the hill. Again, don't quote me on those numbers, but there are obviously losses in the valley and losses as they try to get up the top of the hill. But when that happens, Chief Gall and others warn the camp of another threat to the north, which is Custer's force. Knipe reaches Benteen on his way to McDougal at 2:39. So let's put Mr. Benteen right about here. Knipe is there. Benteen instructs Knipe to the rear to find the pack train, the 160 mules, managed by 80 troopers and guarded by 40 in Company D. Boston Custer, actually Boston Custer reaches Custer and his brothers and reports that Benteen now has reached the main trail. And Custer concludes, we know that Custer, based on his experience, we don't have notes from him, we don't have his thoughts, but it's reasonable to guess that he would have, at this point, realized that it would be about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes before Benteen arrives with support. Of course, Martini reaches Benteen with the famous order at 2:41 to come quick and bring packs. So again, Benteen's probably right about in here at that point. And again, that's also when I'm sorry, I've been stuttering. So at this point, Custer begins to position his forces. He's continuing to move north. He's going to position I Company under Captain Keogh in his rear as his right wing to protect his rear while he moves towards Medicine Tail Coulee with Yates and his headquarters staff. So here we see Custer and Yates going here, but he's got Keogh with I up here around Lucy Ridge up here. E Company with Algernon Smith head to Ford B and Medicine Tail Coulee at about 2:50. Custer with Yates on the bluff. They observe what happens at Ford B at 2:55. E Company commences volley firing at Ford B. I haven't checked this, but I actually believe possibly at 3 o'clock while they're all here on the hill, but maybe the famous volleys we always hear as being the warning volleys, maybe they happen later. I need to go check some of the timings and readings we have on this. But I've often thought that when I read this, that those famous supposed warning volleys are actually these volleys, and they're just the volleys of a skirmish line firing in good order, every man about 5 yards apart, and they fire, every other man, boom, 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 boom. That's how they go with those single shot carbines. But I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to explore. Reno and his force is at the hill and approaching, and as Benteen arrives at 3:02. I think probably that firing happens too fast. So here we are. We see that the Sioux and Cheyenne and very small number of Arapaho, I believe it's only like 10, but I want to keep referencing the Arapaho as well. They're starting to come here. They've chased Reno up the hill. Benteen's arriving. Gall has said, look, Custer's down here. This thing is all of a sudden going to shift. Here's another picture from 2:38 to 2:55. Again, we can see Reno's retreat scout. We can retreat. We can see Reno's timber here, the retreat scout, a retreat route rather. We can see actually that there are warriors on both sides of this. And Greg Michno brings this out wonderfully in his Lakota Noon book, by the way, which I'll talk about in just a minute. There's Ford B, there's the Cheyenne, the Sanzark, Brule, Ogallala, Miniconjou, Blackfeet, Hunkpapa. You can see this. This is about 1.5 miles long. You can see where everything is at right now. Okay, beautiful little aerial here. Actually, this is a my satellite view. Picture again, Patricia Glennon with some interpretation added by Fred Wagner. Ford B episode. We see Smith with Company E. There is talk about a man being shot off of his horse and falling into the river, dressed in a buckskin jacket. Some will say, well, that was General Custer. He died here. No, probably, well, he wasn't. Another reason, we'll get that later, that couldn't have been him. Maybe it was Algernon Smith. Don't really know. You can see all these spots here in this. Again, I'll publish this deck after the last part of my talk, and you can study these more closely at your convenience. Here are the ravines used by Reno's troops to reach the hilltop. They were moving and they were running those horses or running on foot while being chased down, shot, clubbed, hacked, you name it. Benny Hodson, who's mortally wounded. Benny Hodson's a close friend of Major Reno's. Of course, you'll learn, for those of you who study this more closely, about Major Reno's attempts to recover Hodson's bodies and so on. Map up. Now we are at 3 o'clock to 3:30. Custer and his men began to move further north across and into deep coulee and then to the flats beyond, while E Company, the Gray Horse Company, moves away from Fort B, setting up a screening guard and then ultimately moving up to Calhoun Hill with Yates, protecting E Company's rear. Some of E Company dismount and position themselves on the flat above deep coulee to provide covering fire for other horsemen moving out at 3:12 p.m. So here we are, we can literally see, we have Keogh here at 3:05. Keogh moves to here. We have Yates, and then Yates and Custer begin to move out here up to Calhoun Hill. You can see the maneuvers. You can actually see now from Gall's exhortations and others in this camp that the soldiers are to the north. So the camp is making a shift. It's moving, it's smartly making moves. It's swarming, and it's going to use this terrain, and it's just going to come at them. But actually, I like to use the phrase about here, Lieutenant Colonel Custer and his 5 companies, they may think they're the hunters, they are the hunted, but probably don't realize it yet. Lieutenant Colonel Custer has about 90 minutes to live at this point, and he's still moving to the north. Reno is beat up with Benteen at 3 o'clock, 3:05 down here. And this is going on. And of course, the pack mules are way, way, way back. Indians flood and across Medicine Tail Coulee, the Calhoun Hill, Calhoun Coulee, deep coulee at 3:15. As many as 1,000 come in pursuit. Custer's force is being hunted. Yeah. These Indians also begin to harass Keogh's force from a distance, making it across the battlefield and through the coulees. Accounts are from the Indian participants that Gall made the order, gave the call out to take out Keogh's horse holders. And keep in mind, remember what I said, we have small clusters of 30 men, and then with 30 men with 10 others holding horses. And they're dismounted, and they're using shorter range single shot Springfield carbines, and they have 6-shot Colt revolvers. I'm not a ballistics expert, but years ago, I think I did read what the effective range of a single shot Colt. I think it's about 25 yards. Again, people like Chris Hoffer, lots of other people out there who really understand ballistics with that period's weapons. They can speak to this, but they're kind of in an interesting situation. If I was at 7th Cavalry, Custer and Yates with E Company are providing cover. A rendezvous with Keogh at Calhoun Hill. Custer orders F Company, which is Tom Custer's command, to advance scouts to reconnoiter the river ford. Indians continue to move now towards Calhoun Coulee. They infiltrate. They set up at Henryville. Henryville is actually to the southeast, I believe. So they're on, again, as you read Lakota Noon, Greg Michno again brings this out. They are on both sides of this. I mean, Custer's battalion split into 2 wings, actually a 3rd wing when he goes out to 4D himself. They're surrounded. They don't even know it. They're being infiltrated. This is not going to turn out well, as we all know. But he's also, the general is very, 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 very interested in getting out here to go to 4D. There's many authors that have thoughts about why he was going out there. Michael Donahue, bless his heart, has written a wonderful book. It's pleasant, it's well researched, it's beautiful. It's called Where the Rivers Run Red. Michael suggests he was going to try to take hostages. I personally, Mr. Donahue has more work coming out on this that he says, and we should trust Michael. He's worked at this for almost 40 years. is going to show this, but just on the surface of it, if I'm going into Lamar's, Iowa, 12,000 people, and they're all on the run, and I've got 2,500 of them that are purebred, pure warriors, I don't know if I can stop that town by taking a few hostages down over here, but we'll find out. I'm like I say, I'm a journeyman wannabe on this thing. Custer is assured that a ford can be found to the north. Custer and his headquarters staff with Yates and battalion go north in search of the ford at 3:27 p.m. Yeah, our general has about 1 hour to live right now, and he does not know it. Go in the map. Again, aerials here. Here we are. You can see this is the visitor center. Last Stand Hill, actually the monolith, the mass grave marker is here. You can see these ravines here, coulees and so on. They lead down to this area where we're heading. So now we are on map G. Excuse me. Make sure I got it. Yep, map G. So now we've got L Company sets up a skirmish line position while Keogh deploys and moves his horses into a swell behind Calhoun Hill at 3:27 to 3:44. Gall and more warriors reach Henryville at 3:33. Gall is intent and seeing that the horse holders are disabled, as I said, and dispersed, immobilizing I Company. F Company does tell Custer that a crossing ford has been found and the Indians are gathering at 3:37. Custer arrives at Ford D at 3:42. So he's going to go all around and he's going to go right down here and he's going to try, surely that was why he went out there. He's going to try to come down from the north and hit here or take hostages per Mr. Donahue. Custer force at this point, now he's down to about 45 minutes to live. L Company and others in Custer's rear are now facing increasing attacks and skirmish lines. Horse holders are being chased. Horses are being chased off. Crazy Horse and his warriors reach Deep Ravine Crossing and cross, followed by Crow King and his Hunt Papa warriors at 3:49. So make sure I picked the right arrow here, but you can just see where everything is coming. They're just infiltrating. They're coming up through those coulees. I don't have a picture here that shows the terrain, but anybody that's been out to the battlefield or you see other pictures, you can just see all the ruts and valleys and so on. C Company under Harrington suddenly is routed around Finley Ridge at 3:49. Mark Kellogg, the reporter, he's cut down on his donkey, or I think at about 3:50 p.m. We're starting to get kind of ugly now. Crazy Horse's force is met at Deep Ravine by I Company under under Keogh as I Company tries to stop Crazy Horse's advance at 3:52. So now we're having a lot of action up here. Cemetery Ridge. We're trying to make a stand. The general's trying to make a stand. Keogh's there. They're trying to make a stand. They're trying to hold the advance. Custer, of course, is withdrawing from 4D, is at Cemetery Ridge at 3:45, 3:54. He now has 30 minutes to live. Still be interesting to, wouldn't you wonder, does he realize that he only has 30 minutes to live, or that he's done? Custer and Yates are together at Cemetery Ridge. They see how the Indians have split their command and are coming up Battle Ridge at 3:59. Crazy Horse's force smashes through I Company without realizing Custer is to the northwest at 4 o'clock. Bam, he's just going to blast through here. Indians from Henryville now challenge Calhoun Hill and L Company with Calhoun at 4 p.m. More Indians cross the ford at 4D and pursue Custer. Lieutenant Colonel Custer, by going out here, he's just opened up another lane now. They're going to come after him from up here. They're going to come after him from up here. Of course, there's some up here. You don't really see this on Richard Newman's incredible, wonderful. I mean, if we could give an award-winning maps, they're right now. Custer sends Yates to the head of Deep Ravine, attempting to head off the flood of Indians at 4, while Custer remains at Cemetery Ridge. Of course, we know he's going to back up the Battle Ridge here in a moment. Of course, here's the Keogh. Here's a Keogh sector. We can see actually Custer's headquarters and companies F and E and F moving towards 4D. They go from Calhoun to this way. And keep in mind, I think that was 2.33 miles. So they're going up quite a ways. It's certainly outside mutual supporting distances. Here's an aerial, courtesy of Greg Michno. I'll move my picture down here. You see the highway here. For those of you that have been to the battlefield, there's a highway that runs up to Crow Agency and the gift shop and museum. There's a little restaurant, bookstore. It's wonderful, by the way. They serve great food before you go up into the battlefield. Make sure you stop there on the way out or way in. I do not get paid for this. But anyway, here you can see where the general and his force tried to cross 4D. This would be 4D. It's on, actually, it's not on the National Park Service property proper. It's on the other side of the highway. I believe it's private property, and you probably need permission to go see it. Great. Now we're getting close. General Custer is going to perish at 4:40 p.m. Our Custer starts to move the Last Stand Hill. Yates also starts to move. Surviving members of C Company also make their way to the hill at make their way to Last Stand Hill at 4:09. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Custer, or General Custer, as I've labeled it here, have 20 minutes left to live. Now we're going to shoot our horses. There's 34 of those. They're shot. They're formed into barricades. Stragglers from E Company make it to Last Stand Hill at 4:15. Fighting intensifies at Last Stand Hill. And the statement by Chief Gall that this lasted the length of takes a man to eat a hungry man to eat a dinner. We obviously know we've been going here for 2.5, 3 hours. It certainly lasted a lot longer than that. Statements like that, by the way, were somewhat made in defense of Chief Gall in a somewhat flip manner, and I think understandably, because they probably were just tired of being asked this stuff and didn't really like who was asking it either. Ben Teen joins, Stragglers and E Company make it Last Stand Hill 4:15, and basically we're getting down to the bottom line. At this point, though, Ben Teen joins Captain Ware at the top of Ware Point to look north at 4:20. So there was an effort out of Reno Hill to move all 7 companies to the north. They did have the orders to advance. They had they had settled in with all of their wounded. The pack train had finally made its way there. Ware is very enthusiastic, understandably so, that we need to move out. There's debate whether he had orders to move out or not. I believe it's fair to say he did not, but leave that to deeper study. And they began to move out, and they look north at 4:20. Yeah. Ware Point right here. And of course, they undoubtedly, as in all their reports, say we could see like shooting into the ground, we could see dust, but they really were having trouble understanding what they saw. But the pressure when they got up there began to advance on them. As I believe 4 of the 7 companies advanced, the other 3 were trying to make their movement forward. Makes me wonder, of course, they still had the 80 men guarding the pack mules, but wouldn't it have been horrible for them if the Sioux and Cheyenne at this moment had more of their warriors down here and could have seized the pack train? That would have been, well, they probably wouldn't have had anyone live from this. Back up here in Custer Hill, the fighting is like 1,000 dogs fighting each other, said Wooden Leg. Men were throwing down carbines. They were shooting pistols wildly in the air. They shot themselves. There's a last assault by the Suicide Boys at Last Stand Hill. Many of them were killed, if not all. There's dust, smoke, screams, hand-to-hand fighting up at 4:36 p.m. Lastly, at 4:40, Lieutenant Colonel Custer is dead. The last of E Company charged down Deep Ravine, where they're slaughtered at 4:40. And that, my friends, is the battle proper of the Little Bighorn on the 25th. Here's a picture of, again, courtesy of Greg Michno. You can see the visitor center. Actually, the visitor center here, you can see Last Stand Hill. You can see the mass grave, the marker. You can actually see the military cemetery. You can see this terrain here. It's a little fuzzy, but when you get the deck, you know, you can look at this a little better. Of course, Lieutenant Colonel Custer and all of his command are wiped out. They're defeated. The Indian forces now are going to ascend upon Reno's Hill. They've withdrawn back from Ware Point. Colonel Benteen earns much credit for taking charge. There's no doubt that Major Reno was, you know, not himself, not well formed after his experience down in the valley, but they make a stand of it and actually are able to make it through the night of the 25th, are able to survive another attack on the morning of the 26th before all what was left. You know, many of the women and children had already begun to flee, I believe, to the Wolf Mountains area, but many others, warriors, were still here. They continued to assault. Some of the testimonies were that they were intent on finishing this off. I think it's very interesting to note that the Sioux and Cheyenne and Arapaho did not leave the night of the 25th. Again, Indians did not flee in the face of the army. They stuck around. They lamented their dead. They had some of the bodies of those that they had killed. They had, they took the uniforms. Up here at Custer's command, they actually had the weapons. They had the Springfield carbines. They had the pistols. They had the ammunition. They, you know, and down here at Reno Hill, men recognized the sounds of 45-70 Springfield carbines firing upon them. And so this is, again, a lot of the assumptions about what would happen in the summer of 76 were wrong across the board. Crook experienced it, Gibbon experienced it, and of course, Lieutenant Colonel Custer and his 7th Cavalry got quite a dose of it here on the afternoon of the 25th. What's also interesting is the night of the 26th, General Terry's command with Gibbon do reach this area, and they camp about 4 miles to the north. And it's interesting, General Terry sends a force, a small scouting party down towards this area because they can see something. He wants to know what's there. And that scouting party is fired on. What they say, they believe, are men. They thought they'd been fired on the 7th Cavalry because they saw columns of horses with men on them dressed as the 7th Cavalry. And there's a quote, I can't remember the fellow's name, but one of the men said that when we get in there on the 27th, I'm going to deal with this 7th Cavalry because they were firing on us. And they think that their fellow army, our comrades, are firing on them. And, you know, it's friendly fire, but it's not friendly. It turns out it's not their comrades, it's the warriors dressed in the clothes and using the weapons of the 7th Cavalry. This also dispels one of the myths we'll get into in part 3 that the Springfield carbines jammed. They generally did not jam. And of course, they're quite useful to the warriors after they cut their hands on them. With that, I think we're done with part 2. A couple of comments before I wrap up. I just wanted to, you know, point out some resources. And of course, at the end of part 3, and part 3 is the fun part of this presentation because I get to really just kind of share perspectives, the views, the Army view, the tribes view, the federal view, and also Sod House view. And I love this part of it because now I'm in my wheelhouse of kind of looking strategically and perspectives. But as we think about the battle, I'm gonna go all the way back. I wrap this up. You know, if you want to learn about the battle, I would say one of the best spots to start. I'm going to kind of give you some advice here. And you can find this booklet online. I've posted links to it in our Little Bighorn Associates Facebook group. I'll publish it when I published all my deck and my notes. It was written way back in 1969. Now I'm breaking my rule where I said something changed in 83, but Robert Utley, who used to work for the Park Service, and many of you may or may not know this, in the 1950s, Mr. Utley was like a bugler. He was like your ordinary, just ordinary person that worked there at the battlefield as a young man. Well, he wrote this most wonderful guide. I consider it very vanilla-ish and just a good description of it. Good place to start. Of course, the foundations of everything we know, if we think about what Professor Gary Gallagher said, all come in 1983. And that is the work of Douglas Scott, Fox, Melissa Connor, and Dick Harmon. And of course, here's one of their texts. It's from University of Oklahoma Press, Archaeological Perspectives on the Battle of Little Bighorn. This text is probably not as reader friendly. It's more of a technical text, describes, just the artifacts that were found as the archaeologists worked the battlefield with volunteers with their metal detectors and sonar equipments and all the things they found. And really it's the science of what they did. Foundation, which has been inherited in most of the modern writings of the serious writers. We have three. I'm just going to have some fun. I'm going to take a shot at them. I mean, they deserve it. And if they disagree with me, they can post a rebuttal or people can defend them. Pretty well known, those that know me, what my thoughts are on some of the later books. I'll call them pop histories that have hit. Richard Allen Fox, Archaeology, History, and Custer's Last Battle. What Scott did and Fox did as well is, this isn't just, I used to question the assumptions of this. I'd say, well, people souvenired on the battlefield. People, it's a crime scene that's been disturbed. But actually, Richard Fox does a marvelous job of bringing together the first-person interviews, the prior findings, other history, and then he uses the archaeological record of the artifacts found, and he brings it together. And it's got a really good, it's just, it's a good book to read. I'd call it a serious book. It's beyond that primer level, but it's a serious book. It's a little heavy reading. You have to work at to get through it. Now, let's say you want to get what we just went through in a more quality manner. Well, Fred Wagner, he's got some arrows in his back, but Fred's gotten some awards and he's done some great work here. The strategy of defeat at the Little Bighorn, a military timing analysis of battle. Fred's a former military officer. Of course, he was spent another 2/3 of his career in the private sector, earning a living as a civilian, but also he, between just being smart, talking to a lot of people, inheriting all of the interviews, sifting through them, going out there, working with Fox and Scott, and just gathering it all together and just putting his mind to it and running experiments. He's written this. But Fred says right at the beginning of his book, he says, if you want to understand this and be an expert, he says, you read my book, you read Fox's book, and then he says, read Willard's Little Bighorn Diary. And he says, you will be an I don't know if he says expert, but he says, you'll have this thing pretty well figured out. Of course, Fred, about a year ago, within the last year, came out with another book called Major Marcus Reno and the Valley of the Little Bighorn. His strategy of defeat book, he talks about what went on in the valley, but this is a deeper dive into what went on in the valley, and also the Reno Scout, which I made many references to in my part 1 video. I have no financial interest in this, but I'm telling you, I'm very, very impressed. Now we've got all of that. You'll understand, but and they're good. But I got to tell you, I like color commentary in sports. You have color commentary, it's that other person in the box who adds the color. Not that there's not a lot of color, commentary, interpretation, what I just gave you. I have to tell you, I put the reading off. I put off reading Greg Bitschow's Lakota Noon for a long time, probably 10 years. I'd see this thing laying around. I'm like, geez, another book on the battle. Oh my goodness, was I wrong? Was I wrong about that? Greg has gathered together all of as many as can be found, the Sioux and the Cheyenne and the Arapaho and all the scouts, everybody's, particularly the Native American view. And as you read this, as I read this, while I'm watching what's going on up in the ridges, he puts you in the circles. You can feel the tension. You can feel what's going on. You can see it through their eyes. At about 1:30 p.m., I'm in this book thinking, 7th Cavalry, get out of here. You guys got to turn around. No, don't go north. Do not break into east to 2 wings, Lieutenant Colonel Custer. No, don't put a 3rd wing out to D. You have got to get out of here. I mean, Greg Michno brings that to you, but you really understand the decision making, and you understand how smart and intelligent the Sioux and Cheyenne and their tribe, their leaders, their warrior societies, the people were. These are incredibly bright, smart, organized, talented folks, which I referenced yesterday, going back, as Red Cloud proved in the 1860s. Now, if you want to take another angle on this, and I have a lot of warmth for this, Greg Michno followed, actually, I think he wrote this book first, The Mystery of E Troop. Greg wrote this, and there are some people who debate, did E Troop at the end, as you remember my talk, I said they charged down, I think, Deep Coulee. Some say, no, they charged down south. They charged down from the Cemetery Ridge area. Even if Greg makes a darn good case for that, because we've never found, as if I was searching, but the people who study this professionally have not found the remains of the E Company troopers that went down on that charge. And so Greg says, well, that's because they're not there. They're over here. And even if Greg is wrong, he has assembled a wonderful book full of the Indian accounts. And you can just read every account again and relive it through their perspective. And that, if I have a criticism, and I'm a newcomer to this, like in the last 12 months, so many of us, including me, as I said, my first reaction to this in 91 was, why did Custer lose? It wasn't, how did this camp repulse a surprise attack? How wonderful it was that they saved themselves. Well, if you read Lakota Noon and The Mystery of E Troop, I think you'll have a sense for that. In addition to that, I'd also, along that vein, I would encourage you to read, and I'll get into some of this with the views of the tribes, books, that are written by or are written by those that we respect about the culture, the practices, the ceremonies, the training, the upbringing of people, that the Sioux and the Cheyenne and the Crow and the Arikara and the, just on and on, Arapaho, all those people, the Blackfeet, and just so on. We need to understand that. That's a rich culture. And understanding that will help you understand, wow, this is how they successfully fought off Lieutenant Colonel Custer and his 12 companies. They're marvelous, marvelous people. It's incredible. Look at how they live their lives. Lastly, and this is a tongue-in-cheek, assuming I haven't lost it, assuming there's somebody still watching this video, I gotta give a shout out. This is a tongue-in-cheek book, but it's a darn serious one. There's SLA Marshall, and Slam Marshall's a general, and he was actually the official U.S. Army military historian, but also he would do biopsies on battles in the Korean War. I think he may have looked into World War II, but he certainly also spent time in Vietnam and elsewhere. He actually has relatives, a forefather that actually was on, I want to say, the Pine Ridge. It might be the Rosebud Reservation as a missionary. He was an honorary member of Ogallala tribe. He visited the battlefield, but he brought to bear in the early 70s those same skills that he would use to understand what happened and the decomposition of a company or a platoon or squad when it's under pressure, which is actually what Richard Fox shows through his work, is that these men under pressure, they got bunched up, They abandoned their 5 yards apart skirmish lines. They bunched up. They lost their composition. And then they were rather easily dispatched by the warriors who were skilled at all the things they did with close-in combat, with clubs and bows and arrow and everything they did. I got to say to you, his book, which covers many different Indian fights, but his book on his chapter on Custer's Last Stand, written early 70s, he's cited actually by Richard Fox, who's one of the archaeologists, as saying Slam Marshall's work influenced him. So when you read, even if Fred Wagner or Grimishno or any of the folks, if they are referencing Fox, they're referencing Slam Marshall. And I got to tell you, this book's a hoot to read. It's irreverent. He says some very candid things about what happened with the 7th Cavalry and its decisions made in the battle. But I'll leave that to you. I think you picked this thing up probably $3 as a U book. I just found it to be a hoot to read. With that, I'm done. I think about 55 minutes. I think I'm blowing away my time budget, but I hope this is helpful to you. Shout out to all of those who provided these materials, and I'll move on to part 3. I'll get that posted as soon as I can, but thanks. Have a great day. We'll stop sharing and we'll end.